Hi, I'm Alex Grieve, better known as IB Crazy, and this is Success at FPV Part 14, FPV Racing. With so many video pilots getting together, it was only a matter of time before races started happening. And whether you fly fixed wing around pylons or multi-rotors through gates, there's nothing more fun than getting together with a group of friends and just hashing it out on the race course. Unfortunately, due to lack of a standard in many frequencies, it's not so easy to do. But in this video, I'll teach you how to do this and be successful at it. The most important thing in an FPV race is that all pilots be responsible. And that means responsible use of the band. For an FPV race, you're not going long distance. Usually only 200 to 300 meters is all you need to go. Therefore, you only need 25 to 50 milliwatts transmit power max to make the race happen. The use of a high power transmitter will spam the band. You will trash everybody else's video feed simply because you are running high power. And that's why I recommend an absolute maximum transmit power of 250 milliwatts. These are very common to find 200 and 250 milliwatt transmitters, and that's more than what you need for an FPV race. You'll also want to be sure they are wired up properly and they're using the minimal amount of bandwidth. And when I'm talking about properly and using a minimum amount of bandwidth, I'm talking about grounding the audio lead. We're not listening to audio on the track, and therefore we want to ground the audio lead. The reason for this is the audio lead is uncontrolled, and it lies on the outskirts of the video. Therefore, if this lead is not grounded, it will continue to grow in voltage and increase the bandwidth and encroach on nearby channels. Now, this doesn't mean you can simply cut it off. It must be connected to 0 volts. Otherwise, it will have this problem. And if you need proof, take a digital multimeter, turn it to voltage, take the leads like this, and watch the voltage increase. That's increased bandwidth. So please, please ground your audio lead. That will keep you from spamming everybody else. Another thing to consider is the use of a proper antenna system. And what that means is you must use circular polarization. Linear does not cut it here, guys. You need the advantage of a rotational signal in order to reject nearby channels. And so what you want to do is mix right hand and left hand on adjacent channels. So channel 1 be right hand, 2 left hand, 3 right hand, 4 left hand, and on down the line. What this does is make sure that you're interfering with nearby channels as little as possible. If my transmitter is rotating this way, and your receiver is listening only to signals this direction, then you are going to receive my signal at a very, very low power. The reduction is usually somewhere to the tune of 15 to 20 times when using the proper antenna. And when I say proper, I don't mean just any circular antenna. There's a lot of crap out there these days, guys. So if you build your own, you're probably okay. You're going to do a lot better than the cheap junk out there. But if you're not comfortable building your own, please buy a decent antenna set. Me personally, I like running an antenna such as the Air Screw for right hand. Also, the Mad Mushroom and the Cyclone and Cloverleaf are all excellent antennas with high axial ratio. For left hand, I like running the Airblade. Again, the name of this game is axial ratio. The higher the axial ratio, the less you're going to interfere with other people's channels. On the receiver, I recommend a directional antenna. I usually use a 3-turn helical or a crosshair. And the reason I recommend using a directional is these tend to be better when going behind objects. And FPV races are a lot more fun when there's obstacles in the way. And thus I recommend using a directional antenna at the corner of your racetrack. You don't want to be right up on the edge of your racetrack either. You want to be back at least 10 feet. But if you can go back as far as 25 or even 50 feet from your track, this is a huge advantage because aircraft passing in front of you not only are not at a risk of running into you sitting there racing, but also their signals don't compete as strongly with your signal. And thus you have minimal channel collisions. The other thing is with a directional antenna is you've got a beam to stay within. So if you can put the entire track in the beam of your antenna, you're going to find that a directional antenna does much better than an Omni ever will. The other advantage to a directional is a directional does not listen to interfering signals behind it. Another thing I highly recommend, especially when running 5.8 gigahertz, is having one of these at your track. This is a spectrum analyzer. This is the RF Explorer, which is currently capable of 5.8 gigahertz. What this does is tells you where your channel is. So many of these transmitters don't use a decent standard, and we really don't know what channel we're on except by guessing. Well, this takes the guesswork out of it and shows you exactly how much bandwidth you're using, and also allows you to scan channels to be sure one channel isn't bumping into the other to make for the cleanest system. Though not strictly required, I highly recommend it. And what I recommend as far as channel separation is at least 35 megahertz between channels at 5.8 gigahertz. Now, not everybody's going to want to run 5.8 gigahertz. I personally like 2.4 gigahertz and 1.3 gigahertz. However, a lot of people use 2.4 gigahertz radios. Well, if everybody's using a 2.4 gigahertz radio, or if any one person's on a 2.4 gigahertz radio, and you want to run 2.4 video, the only channel available is 2305 megahertz. And again, you only need 200 milliwatts. I have flown with 200 aircraft in the air, full contact combat, running 200 milliwatts on my transmitter on 2305 megahertz, and was able to run combat FPV while everybody was running line of sight. For 1.3 gigahertz, we have two channels here in the US, 1280 and 1258. If one is using right hand, the other can use left hand. Now for 1.3 gigahertz, if you could drop it down to 100 milliwatts, I would highly recommend it. 1.3 has a lot more punch than 5.8 gigahertz does, and it really helps to keep from walking on the nearby 1.3 gigahertz band. Now you might not want to fly with this big antenna on top of your aircraft, but remember, lower frequencies, higher penetration. What you lose in drag and possibly catching an object, you're going to gain in the clear video quality. The other thing you want to do is choose a good quality receiver. While this doesn't affect the other people, it does affect your video quality. You want to choose a receiver with a very, very, very narrow video band. What this means is that it's further away from other channels as far as where it's listening. This is where receivers with a modified SAW filter really excel. I highly recommend a good receiver with excellent filtration so you don't get walked on by other people. And last but not least, you want to be sure you classify your races appropriately and choose a track to fit your pilot's skill level. An open field with a couple of gates is great for beginners, but it's no fun for advanced pilots. Choose a track with natural obstacles such as trees or even a pavilion. Just be sure that nobody's around. As your skills improve, you're going to find the tracks will get smaller and smaller and smaller as far as obstacles. It's a lot more exciting to have obstacles in the track. The other thing is it puts everybody on a more even keel because you have to slow down to shoot that obstacle. So this is one of the best ways to put the quadcopters, the tricopters, and the hexacopters on the same track and have reasonable competition. Another thing to consider is strict enforcement of frames. I see a lot of 250 class frames that aren't truly 250. And the larger your frame is, the better it's going to handle. And thus, however you choose your classification systems, you're going to want to enforce it strictly. Multi-rotor frames are measured from the center of the prop across the frame to the other center. This is a 250. That means it's 250 millimeters from here to here. Most 250s are actually 265 to 280. And the reason they do this is to fit a 6-inch prop in the frame. That is an unfair advantage against a 5-inch prop. So you want to be sure that you're truly running the same class. On a tricopter, things get a little bit different. It's actually measured from the center of the rotor to the center of the frame because obviously there is no cross rotor over here. And finally, another way to separate is 3, 4, 5, 6 cells. The number of cells determines how much power you can put into the motors of the vehicle. It is truly an unfair advantage for a 4-cell to run against a 3-cell vehicle, simply because the 4-cell can produce a lot more power. Another way to enforce this is simply having weight classes, saying your weight must be below a certain value, or your motors below a certain size, because using larger motors allows you to put a lot more power out. So choose your classifications wisely. This is just my recommendation. So with that, please go out, have a good time, fly responsibly and aggressively as you can. And when you do, hit that record button, because there's few things more exciting than an FPV race. I'm IB Crazy, and keep 'em flying.